leftists who were encouraging people to not vote or to vote for Jill Stein, I have some genuine.
It's a great question, and I'm not going to answer all three of them, mainly because I keep forgetting, but also because I'm a bit dumb. But it all centres around what is a leftist. And when I refer to leftists, I refer to groups of people who are anti-capitalists, people who don't believe in capitalism and want to destroy it. These groups of people are comprised of socialists, communists, anarchists, like various black liberation movements across the world, and yeah, a bunch of those kind of groups. But what we see in America and this country particularly is the term leftist has been co-opted by capitalists. So we have, for example, people Democrat voters call themselves leftists, but they're a neoliberal party, and they believe in the values of capitalism and uphold those values of capitalism. And we see it in this country as well. We see it in Australia. The Labor Party, for example, considers themselves a leftist party, but we see them just be neoliberal and introduce neoliberal policies and privatise public assets and all that kind of stuff. So leftist, the term, has been co-opted by the capitalists. So noting these two kind of differences and the context between the term leftist and, leftist in quotation marks, actual leftists, actual anti-capitalist leftists, there's a significant portion of leftists who don't believe in voting as a way to achieve revolution, for example, or actual structural systemic change. And I also want to say it's a very valid perspective, because the theory behind it being that if we just vote for a party of the ruling class to save us, would you believe that they're not actually going to save us because we're voting for capitalists, regardless of who we vote for, left or right or whatever? So there's a lot of proper leftists who won't vote, or if they're required to vote by law, will informally vote or donkey vote and kind of invalidate their vote and whatever, because of the belief that it's a mass movement that will result in change. It's not voting for some ruling class party. There's also a belief that, the master's tools won't dismantle his house. I personally believe that the more effective way to dismantle the systems of capitalism and all that kind of stuff is not by voting, but by community organising and collectivising and getting people together, because that's where the true power lies. But I also believe that we can do both. You can also vote if you want, because there's a lot of people who won't be involved in community organising but do consider themselves anti-capitalists or leftists, and those people should be able to vote as well. So when leftists are given an option between voting for a conservative government or a liberal government, most people will reject that option. Most actual leftists will reject that option because both of those options are kind of shit, particularly when both of them will enable an ongoing genocide. And some of them will vote third party and some of them will not vote. I think the actual left, third party vote was only 0.5% of the total American vote. But there are also a lot of leftists in swing states who did vote Democrat because of the risk of a Trump government. There's also a number of leftists who are saying they won by Trump winning and whatever, and that's a bit of a complex one. I don't particularly agree with it, and it's about accelerationism. Accelerationism is kind of a Marxist theory in which our material conditions will have to get a lot worse before we'll actually do something, before there'll be a revolution and whatever. And that can be achieved by shitty governments, because as people's material conditions get worse, they become more radicalized, blah, 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 blah. The criticism of accelerationism particularly is that if your material conditions do get a lot worse and there's no class consciousness movement going on, that will not help anyone. If we're not building any sort of class consciousness and conditions are getting worse, we'll just devolve into fascism a lot quicker, and there won't be a counter movement. There will not be a revolutionary movement if we don't do that. And for a lot of us, we aren't doing that. Particularly in America, there's no, the whole kind of system is openly hostile to an anti-capitalist perspective. So I don't think accelerationism is the answer in America or in our country. That being said, I don't think reformism or incrementalism is the answer either. I don't want us to be appeased by getting handed little crumbs from the plate of capital and being I think we should vote for someone who will kill a few less Palestinians, for example. And there's no right answer. Everyone's answers are valid. But the outcome of this American election was not determined by the leftists. With such a small kind of third-party vote, the outcome was determined by a poor Democrat campaign and a very effective campaign against particularly not actually marginalized white people, but people that they made feel like they were marginalized. And it's pretty horrific. But blaming leftists here who voted third party or didn't vote is not the answer here, because they genuinely didn't affect the election. Like, there's not enough of us here in Australia, let alone in America, to actually affect the outcomes of these things. I think a lot of people did it because if you get, like, I don't know, 5% of the popular vote, you get, like, funding and stuff like that. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's one of the reasons that leftists voted third party. I forgot where I was going with this, but I want to say, like, the outcome of the American election is that evil people now feel emboldened, and we're seeing it in, like, Abby's comments, and we're seeing it in, like, Cheek Media comments and stuff like that, comments like, your body, my choice, and all that kind of, like, horrific stuff, mainly from men. And the answer is that, or the outcome rather, is that we're here now, and we need to deal with that. And the only way we deal with that is, at the moment, not by voting, because there's not going to be an election for a while. The answer is we need to build community movements that are aggressive towards these people, and they're not necessarily violent. I don't care whether or not your perspective on violence is pro or against, but we need to build a movement that counters this incredibly kind of conservative and fascist movement. And we're not doing that. That's the problem, and we need to do that. So, like, if you see people saying that, you need to be arguing with them. You need to be doing something. You need to get up in their face or whatever. It's the same thing that we used to do with Nazis, and we're starting to do again, at least here in and that is, if there are Nazis, make them feel unwelcome, and do that however you want to do that. Anyways, I realise now that I didn't actually answer any of Abby's questions. I just wanted to add some context on leftism and what the term has become and what it used to be. I also don't want to invalidate anyone's feelings in this, because, like, just read some of the comments in Abby's posts. They're particularly fucked, and we need to do something about that, and we only do something about that not by voting at the moment. We do something by getting involved in our communities and pushing back against this sentiment.